Creating a grid layout with Tailwind CSS is as easy as saying grid. So let's go ahead and do that by wrapping our card components inside a div and adding the grid utility class to it. Then we can specify the number of columns in our grid with grid calls 3 to set 3 columns as we have 3 cards to render. Using Tailwind responsive utility variants, we can actually apply the grid column 3 utility at only large screen size and above simply by adding LG colon in front of the class. In other words, using the LG colon prefix, we can conditionally create a 3 columns grid starting from the large screen breakpoint. This works for every utility in the framework, which means you can change anything at a given breakpoint without having to write the media queries yourself. Another important thing to note is that Tailwind is mobile first by default. So by using these responsive prefixes, you are applying the size at a given breakpoint and above. Let's add a space between our cards on small screen with gap 12 and use LG colon to remove this gap for larger screens. Now let's have a look at our components when we resize the window of our browser. Starting at the large screen breakpoint, we have a grid with 3 equally sized columns with no space between each cards. And for smaller screens, our cards are in the same column and separated from each other by some white space. Also, as you can see, our cards are expanding with the size of the screen. Let's control that so that they do not expand as much as the size of our document when we resize the window. We can create a div around the card and use the wfull, maxwmg, and mxauto classes to set the maximum width of the cards for our layouts. Next, we will add the flexbox properties back again in line 40, but this time only starting from large screen, so our 3 columns grid is centered in our page. If I hit save and resize the window, you can see that we have a nice and responsive grid layout for our 3-tier pricing table.